European Americans are Americans with ancestry from Europe. The Spanish were the first Europeans to establish a continuous presence in what is now the United States. Martín de Argüelles, born 1566, St.Augustine, Spanish Florida, was the first known person of European descent born in what is now the United States. 21 years later, Virginia Dare, born in 1587 on Roanoke Island in present-day North Carolina, was the first child born in the 13 colonies to English parents. In the 2014 American Community Survey, German Americans, Irish Americans, English Americans and Italian Americans were the four largest self-reported European ancestry groups in the United States, forming 37.8% of the total population. However, the English Americans and British Americans demography is considered a serious undercount, as the stock tend to self-report and identify as simply Americans due to the length of time they have inhabited America. European Americans are included in the category of white. White is defined by the United States Census Bureau as a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. According to the U.S. Census, European Americans are merely a subset of white Americans. The term non-Hispanic white is often used as a proxy for European Americans, although that also includes a small fraction of peoples of Middle Eastern descent. Terminology. Used in 1995 as part of a review of the Office of Management and Budget's Statistical Policy Directive No. 15, a survey was conducted of census recipients to determine the preferred terminology for the racial ethnic groups defined in the directive. For the white group, European American came third, preferred by 2.35% of panel interviewees. The term is used interchangeably with Caucasian American, White American, and Anglo-American in many places around the United States. Also, whereas the terms White American and Caucasian American carry somewhat ambiguous definitions depending on the speaker, European American has a more specific definition and scope. According to linguist Janet Bing, the term European American has increased a little in use, especially among scholars. Origin. The term is used by some to emphasize the European cultural and geographical ancestral origins of Americans, in the same way as is done for African Americans and Asian Americans. A European American awareness is still notable because 90% of the respondents classified as white in the U.S. Census knew the European ancestry. Historically, the concept of an American originated in the United States as a person of European ancestry, thus excluding African Americans and Native Americans. As a linguistic concern, the term is sometimes meant to discourage a dichotomous view of the racial landscape between the white category and everyone else. Margot Adair suggests that the recognition of specific European American ancestries allows certain Americans to become aware that they come from a variety of different cultures. History. Since 1607, some 57 million immigrants have come to the United States from other lands. Approximately 10 million passed through on the way to some other place or returned to their original homelands, leaving a net gain of some 47 million people. Prior to 1960, the overwhelming majority came from Europe, a European descent from Canada. In 1960, for example, 75.0% of foreign-born population in the United States came from the region of Europe. Before 1881, the vast majority of immigrants, almost 86% of the total, arrived from Northwest Europe, principally Great Britain, Ireland, Germany, and Scandinavia. The years between 1881 and 1893, the pattern shifted. In the sources of U.S. New immigration. Between 1894 and 1914, immigrants from southern, central, and eastern Europe accounted for 69% of the total. Colonial stock, which mostly consists of people of English, Scottish, Scots, Irish or Welsh descent, may be found throughout the country but is especially dominant in New England and the South. Some people of colonial stock, especially in the mid-Atlantic states, are also of Dutch, German and Flemish descent. The vast majority of these are Protestants. The Pennsylvania Dutch population gave the state of Pennsylvania a high German cultural character. French descent, which can also be found throughout the country, is most concentrated in Louisiana, while Spanish descent is dominant in the Southwest and Florida. These are primarily Roman Catholic and were assimilated with the Louisiana Purchase and the aftermath of the Mexican-American War and Adams-Onis Treaty, respectively. The first large wave of European migration after the Revolutionary War came from northern and central Western Europe between about 1820 and 1890. Most of these immigrants were from Ireland, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, and Britain, and with large numbers of Irish and German Catholics immigrating. Roman Catholicism became an important minority religion. Polish Americans usually used to come as German or Austrian citizens. Since Poland lost its independence in the period between 1772 to 1795, descendants of the first wave are dominant in the Midwest and West, although German descent is extremely common in Pennsylvania, and Irish descent is also common in urban centers in the Northeast. The Irish and Germans held onto their ethnic identity throughout the 19th and early half of the 20th centuries, as well as other European ethnic groups. Most people of Polish origin live in the Northeast and the Midwest. Second wave. The second wave of European Americans arrived from the mid-1890s to the 1920s, mainly from southern, central and eastern Europe, as well as Ireland. This wave included Irish, Italians, Greeks, Hungarians, Portuguese, Ukrainians, Russians, Poles and other Slavics, with large numbers of immigrants from Spain, Mexico, Spanish Caribbean and South and Central America. White Hispanics have increased to 8% of the U.S. population, and Texas, California, New York, and Florida are important centers for them. Immigration since 1820. Demographics. At the 2010 census there were 223,553,265 white Americans, which includes 26.7 million white Hispanic and Latino Americans. That is, there are 196.8 million non-Hispanic whites, and 26,735,713 Hispanic whites. The two groups collectively form the census category of white Americans. See race and ethnicity, a group consisting mostly of those of European ancestry, though people of Middle Eastern and North African ancestry are also classified as white by the U.S. Census Bureau. The numbers below give numbers of European Americans as measured by the U.S. Census in 1980, 1990, and 2000. The numbers are measured according to declarations in census responses. This leads to uncertainty over the real meaning of the figures. For instance, as can be seen, according to these figures, the European American population dropped 40 million in 10 years. But in fact this is a reflection of changing census responses. In particular, it reflects the increased popularity of the American option following its inclusion as an example in the 2000 census forms. It is important to note that breakdowns of the European American population into subcomponents is a difficult and rather arbitrary exercise. Farley argues that, because of ethnic intermarriage, the numerous generations that separate respondents from the forebears, and the apparent unimportance to many whites of European origin, responses appear quite inconsistent. In particular, a large majority of European Americans have ancestry from a number of different countries, and the response to a single ancestry gives little indication of the backgrounds of Americans today, when only prompted for a single response. The examples given on the census forms and a pride in identifying the more distinctive parts of one's heritage are important factors. These will likely adversely affect the numbers reporting ancestries from the British Isles. Multiple response ancestry data often greatly increase the numbers reporting for the main ancestry groups, although Farley goes as far to conclude that no simple question will distinguish those who identify strongly with the specific European group from those who report symbolic or imagined ethnicity. Quote, he highlights responses in the current population survey where for the main old ancestry groups, over 40% changed the reported ancestry over the 6-month period between survey waves. An important example to note is that in 1980 23.75 million Americans claimed English ancestry and 25.85 claimed English ancestry together with one or more other. This represents 49.6 million people. The table below shows that in 1990, when only single and primary responses were allowed, this fell to 32 million, and in 2000 to 24 million. The largest self-reported ancestries in 2000, reporting over 5 million members, were in order: German, Irish, English, American, Italian, French, and Polish. They have different distributions within the United States. In general, the northern half of the United States from Pennsylvania westward is dominated by German ancestry, and the southern half by English and American. Irish may be found throughout the entire country. Italian ancestry is most common in the Northeast, Polish in the Great Lakes region, and French in New England and Louisiana, U.S. Census Bureau statisticians estimate that approximately 62% of European Americans today are either wholly or partly of English, Welsh, Irish, or Scottish ancestry. Approximately 86% of European Americans today are of Northwestern and Central European ancestry, and 14% are of Southeastern European and White Hispanic and Latino American descent. Culture. Cultural roots. The culture of the Americans of European descent is the culture of the United States. As the largest component of the American population, the overall American culture reflects the European-influenced culture. The culture has been developing since long before the United States formed a separate country. Much of American culture shows influences from English culture. The colonial heritage means that the major early cultural influences came from English, Irish and Scottish settlers. Colonial ties to Great Britain spread the English language, legal system and other cultural attributes. For the most part, European American cultural lineage can be traced back to Western and Northern Europe and is institutionalized in the government, traditions, and civic education in the U.S. Since most later European Americans have assimilated into American culture, most European Americans now generally express their individual ethnic ties sporadically and symbolically and do not consider the specific ethnic origins to be essential to their identity. However, European American ethnic expression has been revived since the 1960s. Southern Europeans, specifically Italian and Greeks, have maintained high levels of ethnic identity. Same applied to Polish Americans. In the 1960s, Mexican Americans, Jewish Americans, and African Americans started exploring the cultural traditions as the ideal of cultural pluralism took hold. European Americans followed suit by exploring their individual cultural origins and having less shame of expressing the unique cultural heritage. The Solutrean hypothesis suggested that European Americans may have been among the first in the Americas. More recent research has argued this not to be the case and that the founding Native American population came from Siberia through Beringia. An article in the American Journal of Human Genetics states, "Here we show, by using 86 complete mitochondrial genomes, that all Native American haplogroups, including haplogroup X, were part of a single founding population, thereby refuting multiple migration models." Law. The American legal system also has its roots in French philosophy, with the separation of powers in the federal system along with English law in common law. For example, elements of the Magna Carta in it contain provisions on criminal law that were incorporated into the Bill of Rights of the U.S. Constitution. It, as well as other documents, had elements influencing and incorporated into the United States Constitution. American iconic symbols are American flag of the United States, based on the first flag of the United States of America. The Grand Union flag was first flown on December 2, 1775. Cuisine. Apple pie. New England was the first region to experience large-scale English colonization in the early 17th century, beginning in 1620, and it was dominated by East Anglian Calvinists, better known as the Puritans. Baking was a particular favorite of the New Englanders and was the origin of dishes seen today as quintessentially American, such as apple pie and the oven-roasted Thanksgiving turkey. As American as apple pie is a well-known phrase used to suggest that something is all-American. Hamburger, invented in the United States and known as hamburger after German immigrants from Hamburg who named the unnamed food. This cultural and widely known icon has trans-international reach and has been internationally known for decades as a symbol of American fast food. Tex-Mex, invented in Texas and spread around southwestern United States. This fusion between traditional Mexican cuisine and American cuisine has become popular throughout the United States and in North America. Buffalo wings, created in Buffalo, New York in the 1970s. This dish is chicken wings glazed and dipped in vinegar, hot sauce and butter with cayenne pepper and spices until hot and tasty. Now popular all over the country, it has become a symbol of American cuisine. Thanksgiving. In the U.S., it has become a national secular holiday with religious origins. The first Thanksgiving was celebrated by English settlers to give thanks to God and the Native Americans for helping the Pilgrims of Plymouth Colony survive the brutal winter. The modern Thanksgiving holiday traces its origins from a 1621 celebration at the Plymouth Plantation, where the Plymouth settlers held a harvest feast with the Native Americans after a successful growing season. William Bradford is credited as the first to proclaim the American cultural event, which is generally referred to as the first Thanksgiving. Sports. Baseball. English lawyer William Bray recorded a game of baseball on Easter Monday, 1755 in Guildford, Surrey. Bray's diary was verified as authentic in September 2008. This early form of the game was apparently brought to North America by English immigrants. The first appearance of the term that exists in print was in A Little Pretty Pocket Book in 1744, where it is called baseball. Today, rounders, which has been played in England since Tudor times, holds a similarity to baseball, although literary references to early forms of baseball in England predate use of the term rounders. American football can be traced to modified early versions of rugby football played in England and Canadian code football mixed with and ultimately changed by American innovations which led over time to the finished version of the game from 1876 to now. The basic set of rules were first developed in American universities in the mid-19th century. Music. Another area of cultural influence are American patriotic songs. American national anthem takes its melody from the 18th century English song To an Anacreon in Heaven, written by John Stafford Smith from England, for the Anacaontic Society, a men's social club in London, and lyrics written by Francis Scott Key. This became a well-known and recognized patriotic song throughout the United States, which was officially designated as the U.S. national anthem in 1931. Before 1931, other songs served as the hymns of American officialdom. Amazing Grace, written by English poet and clergyman John Newton, popular among African Americans, it became an icon in American culture and has been used for a variety of secular purposes and marketing campaigns. Hail Columbia, initial presidential inauguration song up until early 20th century. Now used for the Vice President. Battle Hymn of the Republic, patriotic song sung during the Civil War time between 1861 to 1865. Motorcycle maker Harley Davidson. The Davidson brothers were of Scottish descent and William S. Harley of English descent, along with Indian Motorcycle Manufacturing Company, was the largest and most recognizable American motorcycle manufacturer. Ancestral origins. Notes states not geographically in Europe, but closely associated with the continent. Squared Armenia. 4 Cyprus. States which straddle the border between Europe and Asia. Cubed Azerbaijan. 5 Georgia. 6 Turkey. 5% European and 95% Asian portions. Other Jewish Americans, particularly those of Ashkenazi and Sephardi descent, are a diaspora population with origins in southwestern Asia, but are often classified as white rather than Asian. In addition, all of the original peoples of the Middle East are classified as white by the U.S. Census Bureau. Gypsy Americans are a diaspora group with origins in the Indian subcontinent, but are sometimes classified as European. Presidents of European descent. Most of the heritage that all 44 U.S. presidents come from is British ancestry. Others include John F. Kennedy of Irish descent, Martin Van Buren of Dutch descent, and 2 presidents whose fathers were of German descent, Dwight D. Eisenhower and Herbert Hoover. Later U.S. presidents' ancestry can often be traced to ancestors from multiple nations in Europe. Admixture. In a recent study, Goncalves et al. 2007 reported sub-Saharan and Amerindian mtDNA lineages at a frequency of 3.1% in white North Americans of European descent. Based on a study of U.S. Census Bureau figures from 1980, 1990, and 2000, Census Bureau statisticians determined that 1 out of 3 European Americans is descended from only one European ethnicity, 1 out of 3 is descended from 2 European nationalities, and 1 out of 3 is descended from 3 or more European ethnic origins. Another study, Lau et al. 2010, was done on a total of 664 Americans. Among them, 246 were self-declared U.S. African Americans, 127 were self-declared U.S. Hispanic Americans, and 245 were self-declared U.S. European Americans from Temple and Killeen, TX, Louisville, Kentucky, Baltimore, Maryland, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Memphis, Tennessee, and Miami, FL, and 46 were self-declared U.S. Asian Americans from the Fairfield, Osos. Self-declared U.S. Europeans showed on average 93.2% of European ancestry. Chromosomal DNA compared to mtDNA tend to show a broader admixture in European Americans. DNA analysis of white Americans by geneticist Mark D. Shriver showed an average of 0.7% sub-Saharan African admixture and 3.2% Native American admixture. In another study, about 30% of all white Americans, approximately 66 million people, have a mean of 2.3% of black African admixture. Southern states with the highest African American populations tended to have the highest percentages of hidden African ancestry. Also, from the 23andMe database, about 5 to at least 13% of self-classified white American Southerners have greater than 1% African ancestry.